Before Vito Genovese, before Charlie Luciano, there was the Morello Crime Family. The Morello Crime Family was one of the earliest crime families to be established in the United States and New York City. The Morellos were based in Manhattan's Italian Harlem and eventually gained dominance in the Italian underworld by defeating the rival Neapolitan Camorra of Brooklyn. Their story is the story of the beginning of Cosa Nostra in New York City. From Corleone to America. Much like the fictional story The Godfather, the Morello family traces its roots back to Corleone, Sicily. In 1865, Calogero Morello married Angelina Piazza, who gave birth to two children, Giuseppe Morello, born in 1867, and Maria Morello, born in 1869. Calogero Morello died in 1872, and 1 year later, Piazza remarried to Bernardo Terranova. The new marriage produced 5 children, 3 sons, Vincenzo, Ciro, and Niccolo, born in 1886, 1888, and 1890 respectively, as well as 2 daughters, Lucia, born in 1877, and Salvatrice, born in 1880. In 1892, it was first son Giuseppe Morello who immigrated to the United States, and on March 8, 1893, he brought his entire family, including his wife, Maria Rosa Maravisi, his mother, Angelina Piazza, his stepfather, Bernardo Terranova, his half-brothers Cicero, Niccolo, and Vincenzo, and his half-sister Rosalia. The Morello Terranova family lived in New York for a while before moving to Louisiana, then Texas, and by 1896, the family was back in New York City. Organized crime beginnings and the 107th Street Mob. Following their return to New York, the brothers began dominating organized crime in East Harlem, Manhattan, and parts of the Bronx, and soon became known as the 107th Street Mob. Older brother and leader of the Morello family, Giuseppe Morello, began enlisting allies, including Ignacio Lupo, a mobster who controlled Little Italy, Manhattan. And on December 23, 1903, Lupo married Morello's half-sister Salvatrice Terranova, cementing the alliance. The Morello-Lupo alliance continued to prosper in 1903 when the group began a major counterfeiting ring with powerful Sicilian mafioso Don Vito Genovese, printing $5 bills in Sicily and smuggling them to the United States. During this time, the Morellos developed a fearsome reputation through numerous acts of violence, including the murder of Giuseppe Joe Cantanilla, whose body was found in a barrel in 1902. His murder, along with the murder of others whose bodies were disposed of in similar fashion, were called the barrel murders by police of the time. These barrel murders soon became a calling card of the Morello crime family. On April 13, 1903, the body of Benedetto Madogna, brother-in-law to police informant Giuseppe De Primo, was found in a barrel after being brutally tortured. A United States Secret Service detective who had been investigating the counterfeiting ring traced the man to a restaurant where he was seen with the Morello crime family boss, Ignacio Lupo, along with associate and hitman Tomasino the Ox Petto. New York City detective Joseph Petrosino later confirmed Madogna's identity after visiting De Primo at Sing Sing prison. A letter by Madogna seeking to leave the organization was found in a search of Madogna's home. With this evidence, several mafiosi were arrested, including Morello, Lupo, Petto, and restaurant owner Pietro Inzarillo, as well as several other members. The charges, however, were later dropped after witnesses changed their statements. The Morello family had consolidated their hold on Upper Manhattan. Additionally, on November 15, 1909, New York City police raided a building the Morellos were using in Highland Park, New York, as a front for their counterfeiting operation. During their raid, New York City detectives recovered a large amount of American and Canadian counterfeit bills. During this time, Morello family bosses Giuseppe Morello and Ignacio the Wolf Lupo were having other problems. After multiple threatening letters were turned in by Black Hand victims, 15 members of the Morellos were arrested, including bosses Giuseppe Morello, Ignacio the Wolf Lupo, and member Pasquale Vassi, who himself possessed $1,200 worth of counterfeit money. Their trials began on July 26, 1910, and ended on February 19th, with all members involved convicted, including Morello and Lupo, who were both sentenced to 30 and 25 years respectively at Atlanta Federal Prison. Due to the convictions of Giuseppe Morello and Ignazio Lupo, leadership of the Morello family passed on to Nicholas "Nick" Terranova, the youngest of the three Terranova brothers. During this time, the family expanded their operations from East Harlem to Greenwich Village, and soon opened up the Veneza restaurant, a club which became a popular hangout for the city's underworld. Despite its early successes, the Morello family soon found its power waning, without its two leaders, Giuseppe Morello and Ignazio the Wolf Lupo. Sensing the family weakening, Captains Gaetano Reyna and Salvatore D'Aquila, of the Bronx and Manhattan respectively, decided to break away, forming their own mafia families. Despite this, Nick Terranova made an early effort to unify much of the Italian underworld in the face of these problems. In order to accomplish this, Terranova allied himself with many prominent members of the Camorra, including Gio Gallucci, who possessed many local political connections. He also found allies in family members from the Old Country. Gaetano Thomas Lamonti and brother Fortunato Charles Lamonti were known as cousins of the Morellos and owned a feed store down the street from the famous murder stable owned by Ignazio Lupo. His efforts to unify the Sicilian mafiosi and the Neapolitan Camorristi during the early 1910s were unsuccessful despite his best efforts. This was due in large part to the murder of Charles Lamonti in 1914 and the murder of Gio Gallucci in 1915, after which the alliance between the Morellos and the Camorra ended. The Mafia-Camorra War. The Brooklyn Camorra made plans to eliminate the mafiosi from Manhattan, including all members of the Morello family. In early 1916, Camorra boss Pellegrino Morano and Lieutenant Vincenzo Paragallo began moving into Morello territory. After 6 months of fighting, Moreno offered a truce to end the stalemate. Mafia boss Nick Terranova agreed to a meeting arranged at Navy Street Cafe, owned by Camorra associate Alessandro Valero. However, upon arriving on September 7, 1916, Terranova was ambushed by 5 members of the Brooklyn Camorra. During the ambush, Terranova was killed, along with his bodyguard, Charles Ubrasio. While the loss of senior family leader Nick Terranova was a terrible blow to the Morello family, Camorra boss Pellegrino Moreno was quickly charged with Nick Terranova's murder after 2 members of the Camorra group, Tony Notoro and Ralph Daniello, contacted New York police and implicated both Moreno and Alessandro Valero in the murder. Both Moreno and Valero were subsequently convicted and imprisoned, effectively ending the Mafia-Camorra War. The Morello Family Civil War. The Mafia-Camorra War ended in 1917, and Terranova brothers Vincenzo and Ciro kept control of the family. Many former Brooklyn Camorra members joined the Morello family. Another returning member of the family was Giuseppe Masseria, who was released from prison after serving 3 years for the burglary of a Bowery pawn shop. Masseria would quickly rise to a top position in the family. Legal problems began to arise for the Morello family, as in 1918, Ciro Terranova was tried for the murders of gambling bosses Charles Lombardi and Joe DeMarco. The case was dismissed, but would be a harbinger for things to come. In 1920, both Giuseppe Morello and Ignazio Lupo were released from prison. At this time, their former captain, now Manhattan Mafia boss, Salvatore D'Aquila, sensing his power about to be threatened by their return, ordered their murders. One of D'Aquila's men, Umberto Valenti, had also run afoul of his boss and was under threat of death. To reintegrate himself within the crime family, Valenti would take out the rising power, the former captain and current ally of the Morellos, Giuseppe Masseria. Valenti's first attempts on Masseria failed. Thus, the war was on. On December 29, 1921, Masseria's men murdered Valenti's ally, Salvatore Morello, on Christie Street. In retaliation, Valenti had Vincent Terranova murdered, effectively taking out the head of the Morello family. On May 8, 1922, while Terranova was in front of his home at 116th Street and 2nd Avenue, he was shot by a gunman from a moving car. In retaliation, Masseria ordered his men to murder Valenti and his bodyguard, Silvia Tagliagamba. Masseria and his men were able to catch up with the two of them, and they ambushed Valenti and Tagliagamba at Grande and Mulberry Street in Manhattan. Tagliagamba was shot down, but Valenti managed to escape. It was then, on August 11, 1922, Masseria's men, including a young Charles Lucky Luciano, murdered Valenti, thus ending the conflict. In the aftermath, Giuseppe Masseria became boss of the Morello family, and Giuseppe Morello, the founder of the Morello family, became his underboss. Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria would go on to rule the family with an iron fist until 1931, when he was betrayed by his top lieutenant, Charles Lucky Luciano. That year, Luciano and his young Turks would murder Masseria and take over the family, and in doing so, usher in the golden age of Cosa Nostra.